You guys glad to be in God's house today? Oh, that was not anywhere close. You guys glad to be in the house of God today? Amen. All right, to maximize your overall worship experience, I'm going to give you a couple of instructions, only based on an encounter this morning during the 9 o'clock service. I think because it's the closest Sunday to April Fool's Day, my mom's phone kept going off in church. Literally with the ringer, all right? And so I just think she was messing with me, I'm not sure, but I'm just going to encourage everyone, please turn your phones off, or your ringers, your buzzers, the whole kit and caboodle. Go ahead and turn them off now. And on behalf of all theater goers, people who are in libraries, people who are in weddings, and anybody who goes to church, it's really distracting. So thank you in advance for doing that, Mom. All right, so there you go. That was that one. Secondly, an announcement I failed to make, but we have opportunities for baptism coming up on the Sunday after April, on the 27th. We already have a group of folks who are going to be getting baptized that day, and if you didn't things didn't line up this last Sunday when we had baptisms, if you'd like to consider doing that, we would love to talk to you about that. It's significant. It's an issue of identity, who you align your life with. It's not just a religious act, and we'd love to talk to you further about that. That'll be going on April the 27th. Well, we're in the middle Sunday of a 3-week series that we're going to be doing, that we're talking about revisiting our church's mission. Where are we going? Who are we about? And this is something, if you've been here for a year, you've had this new, freshened version of it, but it's the same thing that's been talked about since Jesus met with his disciples on top of the mountain, and Matthew 28 came out of it. We're just recycling that. We're stealing his language and turning it into a church's mission, but it's fresh, and it's a reminder of what God's doing with us. And obviously this last Sunday we talked about what would it look like to be a person who loves Jesus, not just someone who is familiar with him, not just someone who has a religious association with the name Christ or Christian. What does it mean to love Jesus? And we learned a lot more than just simply it's a feeling. Well, this week we're going to be talking about, does our life line up with the things that we believe about Jesus? Is the Word of God that he's given to us, does our life look like that? And that's why we have this thing. When you walk out every Sunday, I hope that your eyes catch it. That our Sundays would change our Mondays. So that our Mondays and our Sundays are more and more aligned every day of our Christ walk. And then one last thing, if all that stuff's going on, if I have a genuine relationship with Christ, if I'm getting a bit of his DNA, his way of looking at the world, and my life is starting to align with his, it will invariably lead me to be a person who is helping lift people out of places that they're at. Because they need Christ. Every person needs forgiveness. Every person needs relationship. Every person needs to be able to find worship in its truest form. And so we're a part, as a church, we're doing that. What will be unique about next week as we finish the series up with lifting others, we're going to be talking in much greater detail about our trip to Guatemala and how that was just one more example. This one across borders, but what we try to do every single day, 365 days a year, here inside Mokena as well, that there's people who are lifted from where they're at into the relationship and the presence of God. So keep that in mind. That's going on over the course of the series. Let's try to illustrate a little bit of what live genuinely is and what discipleship. So both learning the Word as well as living it inside of relationships. What it is and what it isn't. I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a common experience that maybe you can appreciate. My son Caleb, who is my 4th child, he just turned 11 months just the other day. And the day he was born compared, now I'm making this distinction on purpose because it's going to come up in a moment. Statistically speaking, all right? Statistically speaking, my son, like my other kids, were bigger at birth than the average kid. They were well more than 8 pounds to 9 pounds, depending on which one they were. They were a little bit bigger, which was a reminder to us that we never had anything to worry about. Our kids didn't come across as unhealthy. We had no concerns whatsoever about their health, okay? Yet, due to ever so obvious genetics that they've been given, both from my wife and I, some things are going to be completely unavoidable to them. My wife is an example. Her side of the genetic tree is that her family on the Battistoni side are all tall, they're taller, and they're slender, all right? That's just kind of the way they're built. My particular offerings to the genetics are just as God intended all of the world at creation, that they would be a certain ordained heavenly height, but was lost at the fall in the garden. But 5'8" is what they're going to be receiving from me, the heavenly height. And so this is a part of the genetics that I bring to it, plus being a little stocky anyway. So they have this mishmash of this type of genetics tall and slender, and shorter and stockier. It's going to be kind of a weird thing. We don't quite know how it's all going to play with them. But overall, it seems as though my kids, when it's all said and done, end up being a little more skinny. Or they're slender. That word will be important in a moment. We just don't know what will be in the long term as they turn into adults. But back to their infancy. For all of our kids, in that first important year, my kid's about ready to hit his first year birthday. That first year, and as it begins to unfold, like every kid, they're starting to lose their baby fat, right? And their bodies are starting to show what their predisposition genetically will end up giving to them. And for the most part, again, these 4 kids have been slender. Well, through all the years, when my wife is the one that generally takes the kids to the doctor, and you go to the doctor for shots, for getting weighed in, they start tugging on your ears, your toes, they do whatever doctors get paid too much money to do, and they do that progressively through that first year and a little bit beyond, right? Well, as my kids have come up, I have 14, a 12, a 10, and then one that's almost 1, they've done the exact same thing and charge us all the exact same amount. And what ends up happening is when they weigh these kids as they go, my children at birth and very early on have statistically speaking, are taller, at least average, if not above average, all the time. I know when they're little babies, they say that they're long. How long are they? I don't like that term. Tall. Maybe because I'm short, I'm sensitive to it, but they're taller than the average baby, all right? They're bigger than the average bear. So they're a little taller, but on the flip side, they're all below average weight. And it gets, the trending from a statistics standpoint, it continues to go down, and they're always like from 30th percentile to 20th, and my kid right now, I think he's like in the 10th percentile of weight. So they all have that kind of general predisposition. That's been the experience so far. And it's when my wife gets these statistics, she goes to the doctor, it sets the groundwork for what I'm getting ready to tell you about. Because it registers with her, our kids are skinny. That kind of a thing. All right, so it sets up the groundwork for what will happen. Well, I need to explain as well, if you don't know me very well, you don't know my wife yet, 3 of our 4 kids are boys. My first 2 and my last, they're boys. Now, this is a parenthesis to understand what I'm getting ready to say. So you got to hear this little separate thing. It seems strange, but you'll understand in a moment. When a woman will come up to another woman, right? When a woman will come up to another woman and she'll go something like this. You are so skinny, you're so small, you're so cute. It's usually interpreted by the other woman as, it's a wonderful compliment. If someone were to come up to a guy, you are so skinny, you're so small, you're so cute. A man interprets that as, you are a weak little girly man, right? Skinny and small and cute. For a woman, oh, that's so nice. I'm glad they see me that way. For a guy, you think I'm a wimp, right? So this is an important little parenthesis to understand what this means. People are apt to do, when you have a baby, it's just natural. What do? They come up and they want to look at your baby. And my wife, through the years, from holding the babies like this to holding it walking them like this, invariably people will come up to the babies, and this one's no different, and they'll say, oh my goodness, he is so cute. He's so little. He's so skinny. Bear in mind that my wife has just been to the doctor 17,000 times this year, and the weight is always lower than the average. And then someone else comes up and says, oh, your baby's so little, right? Because of whatever comparisons they have in their head. So she'll just smile. She's done it to you, by the way. She's done it to you many times. Oh, thank you. What does that mean? So she'll come home to me and she'll say, everyone thinks our babies are unhealthy. They're scrawny, they're little. They were born big, and now they've turned into scrawny little rats. That's her overall reaction. What's wrong with us? What's wrong with them? Looking for the mystery to be solved. So of course, like any reasonable husband, I will look at her in the eyes and I will say, stop blowing things out of proportion. And then I'll come back after I put ice on my black eye, and I'll come back and with a little more thought in my head, I'll say, listen, okay, honey, these are the genetics. They are what they are. Who knows? They could all turn out to be skinny and tall, or skinny and short. They could be fat and tall. I have no idea. We're like a weird mishmash. But are we feeding them right? Are they eating right? I mean, of course, because my wife is much healthier than I would be, and she prepares great meals, and she's like, yeah, we're feeding them good, and they're eating, things like that. Well, then we shouldn't worry, right? We should not worry. As long as they're eating healthy, they're eating right, and they're exercising, and they're still growing. These are all things that are going on. Yes, they are. well, then we'll leave their size up to God. That's not up to us. And I don't know that that comes because it's happened 4 times, many times over. But the point is that this idea of how someone looks and whether in fact they're healthy are 2 separate things. And we see it as a little baby. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, that little encounter, but it has for us. The superficialities, what someone else might see based on a momentary judgment, the superficialities aren't nearly as important as health, personal health. A person isn't healthy on how they look, but how they eat, how they exercise. This is the physical realm, of course. So if a person, on the flip side, ate all unhealthy things, if they never exercised, and they hardly ever ate the things that they were supposed to, then we would have cause for concern. Whether it was a mom to her babies and her children, or as an adult, or as people of spirit. If we only consume the wrong stuff, if we never put it to use, and we hardly ever consume or take in the things that we are most made to receive, then it would be cause for concern. Because the issue for us spiritually is one of growing. Are we taking the right things in? Are we healthy? Are we growing? In the second week of this 3-week series, we're being reminded of who we are. Who we are as people, as families, as churches, as ministries, and thus who we're to be, like I said, as these people living a healthy life. We're told that we're supposed to love Jesus, be in a genuine relationship with him. And then when that happens, when I begin to have a sense of what I've been forgiven of, and that God has a purpose for me, then it's going to start more and more look like, well, I want to know more about him so I can know more about me. Because I'm not going to ever find out about me unless I know him. There's other versions of me that are not anything like he wants me to be. But to know myself will be to know him. And the more that I learn of him, the more I learn of myself, and then I know what kind of life I'm supposed to be living, a genuine life. And invariably, when that happens, it's a natural outcome. When I have an understanding of Christ, know how he lived his life, how he gave his life for me, I start to live more and more like him, I understand his word, automatically, it will turn into helping other people. You know, if you are not in a rhythm and a discipline and a DNA kind of way of life of where other people are lifted by what you do, you know there is a breakdown in one of these 2 things. That's the hard news today, but I'm just going to give it to you so you know. If you don't serve with any regularity, with a commonality of your life, there is a breakdown either in your actual beginning relationships with Christ or the fact that your life isn't lined up yet with him. You aren't living genuinely next to Christ yet. We'll talk more about that. There's good news, but that's the hard news. So as you're just doing a basic evaluation, this is not a theoretical discussion. If you're doing basic math on your life, how many hours, how many minutes, how many people do you spend your life into? That's the piece we're going to talk about this next week, but how we get there is what we're talking about today. Now let me find myself in my notes because I preached a whole other sermon here. All right. Love Jesus, live genuinely, and lift others. Here's what we know for sure. As disciples following God, just like a baby, what our hearts and our minds are taking in, and 2, how we are growing. It's a distinction. Not just that we're growing, how we're growing will reveal an incredible amount about our spiritual health. A really simple example. I'm not the only one, but I'm the one learning this, the wrong way to do this. I am growing. I am growing. There's a healthy way to grow, there's an unhealthy way to grow. Right now, I'm making harder decisions in my own personal life about growing the wrong way. How we are growing is critical, not just that we're growing, because we could be growing in the wrong spaces. Well, what do we need to be attached to grow the right kind of way? Because how we look on the outside is sometimes an indicator, but very rarely what's happening as far as the health, the importance of spiritual health. John, the Gospel of John, chapter 15 is where we start today. John 15. I told you last week that we're going to spend the course of these 3 weeks in a section of Scripture, Gospel of John, chapters 13 through 17. That it's all one and the same moment. It's the disciples' little last pep talk. It's Jesus giving his farewell speech. It's him pouring into them the absolute critical things. Do not fail to understand this. Do not fail to practice that. It's very simple. 4 chapters of that. And from those handful of chapters, we are lifting what we're talking about over the course of these 3 weeks about our church's purpose. What is unique, and we'll see why this is so critical in a moment, is that this is just moments, literally moments before Jesus is betrayed. 24 hours from the moment he will speak the words I'm getting ready to read to you, 24 hours from that point, he'll be dead, buried in the grave, in the tomb. 24 hours after this moment. These are critical words, and he knows it. So he's pouring it all into them. John 15, verse 5. Jesus says, I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who remain in me, and I in them, will produce much fruit. Big definition there. Those who remain in me, and I in them, will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Now, this is a little thing. I want to just capture it because there's more scripture, but keep a little thumb there. He says, producing fruit is a matter of spirituality. It's a matter of our connection to him. But he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. But then he says something else that seems contrary to it. It's something worth looking at. Apart from me, you can do nothing. But what he means to say is, anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. The picture of this vine that he gives us, he's the vine, we're sub-vines, we're little branches off of it. He's saying, you can't do anything apart from me, but you can do something that is apart from me. See that? Because he says there are branches that are on you that are going to be cut and they're going to be thrown out because they don't belong in this vine. It's possible to be doing something even though he says it's impossible to do something apart from him. Do you understand that? We could be wrapping ourselves around and pouring ourselves into and connecting ourselves to things that won't last past the doing. And he's like, anything that's not attached to me in that way is worth nothing. It won't last past its doing. It's not eternal. So it's possible we need to be cautious about the fact that we may not even know we're on autopilot on this thing that is withering. We may not even be aware of it. That's why we have church, by the way. Nobody has a church that has any sense in their heart. Nobody as a pastor, as a leader, as a church, has a church just because we can occupy more butts and chairs on any given 1 hour on a Sunday. It's not the point. The reason why we come to church is to be reminded that what am I on autopilot about that you need to correct? What am I just in the groove on, in a slump spiritually? What do I need to be bumped out of that? And the fewer times I go, the fewer times I'm confronted with that. The more frequently I come to church, the more often I am confronted with what I'm getting myself into that has nothing that will last in it. So that was a free sermon. That's completely free, independent of the sermon. All right, here we go. He says, these are the branches that get thrown away. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. But if you remain in me, and my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want, and it will be granted. When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. What does he not say there? He doesn't say, when you believe, you are my true disciples. He says, when you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. This brings great glory to my Father. I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. Remain in it. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love. This is a deep, deep thing he is saying to his disciples, and we share together today. It is deep. It is harder, not just to understand, it's harder to do. Connectedness to the right source is the heart of what this is about. Being connected to the true vine, being connected to life and health. It's the critical nature in Jesus' words here, isn't it? We know we're healthy, apparently, according to this, if we are connected to the right thing, or, as the scriptures say, to the right person, to the vine, the true vine. In just these 6 verses I just shared with you, just those 6 alone, Jesus will command his followers 6 different repeated times to make sure that our connectedness in the true vine, and the word he uses is remains. 6 times in 6 verses he repeats this word, remains. The word is meno in Greek. That's academic. The idea, though, is critical. In just this, the chapters 13 through 17, as Jesus is giving his farewell address, his pep talk to these guys, his reminders, over the course of those chapters, he will use this word remain 14 different times. 14 different times. It means something. He's repeating it on purpose. Let me give you an example that hopefully will have some value. If today Sean had been mic'd up while playing the guitar, leading us in worship that way, or Rick, who had a mic not only singing, but he was leading us in worship, if he had, at the beginning of the services, we're doing the songs that are bigger, people clap to them, things like that, he has said this, sing louder! we'd have probably interpreted him to mean it's a natural place that we should all sing louder. It's a praise kind of a song. He's being artistic, poetic, encouraging. If he repeated it a second time after that, a song in, sing louder, we'd be like, well, now that seemed a little less placed, like it was artistic or like a flourish. It seemed more like if he said it 3, 4 times, sing louder! You're not loud enough. Then you'd be like, well, now wait a minute. It wasn't just artistic. Now it was a command. If Rick, leading worship 14 times today during our 3 songs, said, will you people please sing louder? We would be like, there's a couple things. Either he is really obnoxious, right? That's really annoying. Or, which is more likely, he is seeing something we don't. So instead of saying, well, that's aggravating, why does he keep saying that? We'd say instead, if we're true-hearted, maybe I'm not expressing hard enough. Maybe I'm not giving my best. Maybe I'm only here on autopilot. He is seeing something that we don't. Well, this is exactly what Jesus is doing. In a very small window of time, they're just sitting around a table. They're talking like they were last week, and we're going to finish next week doing the exact same thing. They're sitting around a table having dinner together. And he's saying, these are the things you need to remember. And for 14 different times he says, not sing louder, but he says, remain. As if this would matter somehow. What is distinct to me is that in the course of this speech he's giving to them, this talk he's giving to them, he will use this word more than any other. More than the word believe. Now, it's not like it's in contrast. Like believing isn't what he's after. But believing what's true, loving Jesus as he has described him, loving Jesus is a perfect pulling into remaining. How many of you guys have ever been in the presence of somebody who passed away? You were there when they died. Raise your hand. Okay. How many for you that was a person that you knew well or loved well? Okay, so it's most of us, right? I've been in the presence of somebody who passed away too right in front of me, and it's happened on a couple of occasions. And when a person's passing away in front of us, it registers with us, doesn't it? One thing, we're not in those situations very frequently. It's not like it happens every day. Secondly, we listen closely when a person is dying, especially if they matter to us. If they say something to us, we remember every word. I do a lot of funerals. And what's strange to me, a lot of times in funerals, when people come up and they share their own piece of it, it's interesting that more people will default in their own personal expressions in funerals about their family member, their loved one. They'll tell more about the last month than they will about the 90, or the hundreds of months that they lived their life. For some reason, those last moments really, really seem to register intensely, and people seem to default to those in funerals and those kind of times of life. They'll tell us what happened as they were dying. We listen closely. If somebody tells us, remain in me, 14 times, this man's dying, 14 different times, remain in me matters, we would sew it into our clothes. We would put it in a frame and hang it over our bed. We would make sure it's on every single wall in our church, because if remain in me is so critical that he says it more than any other thing in his dying moments before he's getting ready to go into heaven, I better pay attention to it. Because if I don't, I must not love him. If we ignored the words of our passing grandfather, our passing dear friend, if we just ignored it and we just passed it off, we don't really love them. If they said it to us when they were dying and we just blew it off. Love is attached to what he's saying. If you love me, you will keep my commandments and you will remain in me. You will live genuinely. Meno. Remain. Our spiritual health will be determined not by how we look, but to whom we are linked. He says, I'm the vine. You're attaching to me. Stay attached to me. It's a decision we make. We choose at some point in our life, for some of us in this room as kids, as others as adults, we choose to plug ourselves into that vine so that the life that's led from that point forward is one built on him. It's fueled by him. It's resourced by him. If we're connected to Christ, not only are we going to be healthy, we're also going to be producing fruit though as well. I know him as my Savior. I know him as the vine. And now my life is sourced in him. Everything I need is found in him for a purpose, which is to produce fruit in me. He's the vine. We're the smaller vines that must stay connected. I want you to do me a favor. This is a little exercise for us today. Would you do me a favor just by sticking your pointer finger up? Left hand, right hand, doesn't matter. Just go ahead and stick it up in the air. All right? Go ahead and do it. It's going to be fun. It's weird, a little bit weird in a second. All right. I want you to take this, and I want you to stick your pointer finger right down in that belly button. Go ahead and stick it in there, all right? Go ahead and do it. Now hold it there. Now hold it there. Wiggle around, get in there, and find it again, right? Now, you and I look at this thing. It's become a mind-numbing experience. Keep it in there. I want you to keep doing it. It would have been weird if I'd asked you to put your finger in somebody else's belly button. So I decided that. Plus, some people are innies, some people are outies, right? I guess they're outie, you have to pinch it instead of point to it or whatever. But point is, this thing is a reminder. We see it in the mirror every day. Every time we take a shower, every time we take a bath, every time we get ready in the morning, every time we get ready for bed at night. We see this thing, and it almost becomes a forgotten thing. This is a reminder from the very beginning that we cannot live without somebody else. It's the first indicator in this life. This thing right here, you can take it out. This thing right here tells us we are not alive without someone else. And it's a little physical reminder of something that's spiritually true. We cannot live, truly live, without someone else. Now, Jesus says we can wrap ourselves around many things. We can connect to things that will shrivel up, it will wither away and die. We can disconnect ourselves from the vine and put it in other things. Starting to get a little anxious about money? Paycheck. Paycheck. Okay, that's mine. I got to make sure I'm working. All right, I got to make sure that paycheck comes in because this is my hope. And suddenly we're attached. Our job, our paycheck, our identity in that, our provisions in that become our God. Okay, maybe not that one for you. I'm getting nervous about life. I'm becoming an anxious person. My identity is becoming a little confused. Things are happening in my life. Instead of being attached and identified with Him, I'm attaching to it. Someone tell me, my counselor, my psychiatrist, someone tell me who I am. See, we can take all kinds of things in our life and we're detach it, our provision, our identity, our purpose, our mission, our reason for being, when we detach it from Him and we put it in something else, it will produce something, but not the kind of fruit that you and I want, Jesus says. And this is just that little belly button reminder, is that we're required, and we will always be attached to somebody else. Because absent this connection to the true vine, we don't have the strength to go on. Do we? Not really. We might try to muster strength, will ourselves through something, start to ratchet down and control everything else so our anxieties are turned into doing something. We can try that for a while. At some point, we're going to freak out. At some point, we're going to fall off a cliff. At some point, it's going to run out. So unless we're attached to Him, we have no real strength that will last. We have to be attached to the true vine. Talking about a source of life that's bigger than anything we've ever seen. Several years ago, during the Tournament of Roses, the parade on January the 1st, I don't know if you guys all jump in the same bed and watch it like my family and I like to do every January 1st. But one of the parade submissions a couple of years back was a float by Chevron. Many of you guys know that's one of the world's largest oil producing or gas producing companies in the whole planet. Well, Chevron is actually a conglomerate. It's a whole mishmash of a bunch of different companies that it's eaten up through the years. In fact, it emerged out of Standard Oil. Those of you who are a little older might recognize that name. It was the old and huge, clumsy Standard Oil. It took that name on. On top of that, it began to eat up other companies. Texaco, Unical. Again, folks who are older, you know these names. It started gobbling up a bunch of little oil, gas companies and started eating it up. But it still kept the name. Well, when you start adding all these different companies, their branding, their missions, their people, at some point not only in-house, but also outside of a company, you start to say, what are we really about, right? They become about acquisition at that point, instead of just the simple thing of they make gas for us in our cars, right? So what they were trying to do over the course of a couple of years is they wanted to start to secure their branding. They wanted to make it clear to everybody in-house in Chevron, if they came from Standard, if they came from Unical, or they came up from the beginning, they wanted to know this is what Chevron's about. So they started doing their branding in-house, and they started doing it out-house. That's why they did this Tournament of Roses parade. They had their own little float submission. Well, they get their float, and they're going a little bit past halfway down the route, and all of a sudden, their submission comes to a screeching halt, and the entire parade behind it. You're like, okay, what's the world? They're starting to look at it. What's the problem here? Maybe something mechanically came off. Did something in the hitch come undone? The thing that's pulling it. Did the celebrity who they paid a couple $1,000s to wave like this and stand in on the parade, did they faint? No. Can you guess what happened with one of the world's largest gas-producing companies? They ran out of gas. So the entire the Rose Parade on January 1st had to wait for somebody to get a can and go get a couple gallons of gas and bring it back to put some fuel in this thing. Now, they all seem really stupid, don't they? But yeah, we're really not that far. We have access. To use the word unlimited really undermines it. Unlimited power for life. And we are still fretting about paychecks. Fretting over some little slight that a person gave to us at work. And so we go into a tizzy. Now our identity is all messed up. You see what I'm saying? We get thrown off on the smallest little things that billions of people, for thousands of years have all had to deal with. It's not going to shake our world. Even the hardest of things should not get us off of this one reality. If you're going through the worst time in your life and it's real, it's not just a little thing, if it's real, we have unlimited source of strength for life. We are umbilicaled by choice to God. That's how we live genuinely. Our life is aligned with a person that we know gave himself for me. Now my life is defined by his forgiveness, but also by his manner of living. I'm beginning to live more and more like him. Now you're understanding more and more. We have unlimited access to an unstoppable force. That's amazing. But not only does it give us source for living, but that's not just the point. See, keeping us alive for a little bit longer, or keeping us satisfied from the things that haunt us, keeping us filled from the things that we thirst for, this is not even the total point. He sustains us and gives us strength and sources life in us for a purpose of producing fruit. Producing fruit. To live genuinely means that we're attached to that whom or which is most real. And it changes everything about the way we live. We're attaching by choice to the true vine so that God can produce himself inside of us. Because if we're attached to him, and he's the vine by which we live, and he is the vine that we're becoming into, well then the fruit that's going to come up will be like him. I guess it's a really great time, now that I have your heart, hopefully, your attention, is what fruit are you producing right now? This is why we all came to church today, for this question. It's not a religious question.